In the year of our Lord 1348, the village of Saint-Morel lost half its people, not to war, not to famine, but to the kind of death that does not march with drums, nor howl through battle horns. Not a hospital, there were no such things for peasants. It was a side room in the back of the midwife's cottage, with a cracked hearth, a stained mattress stuffed with straw, and a single wooden crucifix dangling above the doorway like a warning. If you were a woman of Saint-Morel and your belly grew round with life, you would be taken to that room near the end. And then you would wait. It came quietly, wrapped in linen and damp straw, with a scent like iron and milk. For others, the wait dragged on 3 days. For and the screams turned hoarse, turned into begging, turned into silence. Isabeau laughed when he gave it to her. She held it to her lips and whispered something into the tiny ears. No one heard what she said, but from that day on, she began to pray less, and she began to hum more. It came through the bodies of women bent, low legs trembling, eyes fixed on wooden beams above them. It came through birth. Isabeau still walked Isley, still climbed the hill behind the chapel for a wild time. To Isley, some thought, and her humming stopped, too proudly. One whispered that the devil favored women who smiled too much while pregnant. They called it the House of Waiting. Isabeau clenched her jaw. She did not scream, not at first. But pain is a patient guest, does not leave until it has been fed, and by dawn she was howling. She kissed Lutz's hand before they closed the door behind her. He never saw her again. She hung damp herbs from the rafters. She soaked cloths in vinegar. She lit a candle at the Virgin's feet. Then she placed her hand on Isabeau's stomach and frowned. She fed Isabeau boiled nettle and crushed garlic. She whispered spells passed down from Roman mothers and Moorish slaves. None of it worked. They spoke only of God's will, or the devil's whisper. They said if a woman had lied in life, her labor would be long. If she had gazed at a man not her husband, the child would be born backwards. If she had cursed or thought impure thoughts, her blood would boil during the birth. For some, the wait was short. A scream, a wail, and then blood-slick arms cradling the gift of a future. In Saint-Morel, childbirth was not a celebration. It was a lottery, a divine gamble. And the House of Waiting was its altar. No one understood why some mothers lived and others bled into the straw. They did not know of infections or uterine rupture. She begged for water, then vomited it. Her hands clutched the sheets like a drowning woman grabs at rope. Her eyes rolled back. She began to call out not for Luke, nor her mother, but for someone who wasn't there. So they prayed. They lit candles. They bathed in holy water. But nothing could cleanse the truth. Giving life could kill you. Her name was Isabeau, 17 winters old. A miller's daughter with bright teeth and hips made for bearing, or so the old women whispered. She was married to Luke, the blacksmith's son, barely a man himself, but strong, with a voice like oak and eyes that never quite met yours. They said he loved her in his own quiet way. Brought her wildflowers when he could. Sat by her side during the long evenings, mending his leather as she spun wool. When her belly began to swell, Luke smiled. He carved a wooden toy horse for the child, though no one yet knew if it would be a boy. In the 7th month, the women began to watch her closely. By the 9th month, she could no longer stand without clutching her lower back. Her skin grew pale. Her hands swelled. On the night of the full moon, her waters broke. They carried her to the House of Waiting, wrapped in her wedding cloak. Inside, the midwife Theres, who had seen more blood than most soldiers, prepared the room. The baby was not moving. The pain began slowly, like a wave brushing against the shore. Theres muttered prayers under her breath. The baby was stuck. 12 hours, then 15, then 20. When the sun set again, Isabeau had bitten through her own lip. Theres knew the signs. She had seen it before. She lit the last candle, and then came the blood. The blood came in sheets thick and sudden, like a river breaking its banks. Ceres gasped, but she did not scream. Midwives in the 14th century had no time for screams. Only cloth. Only hands. Only desperate prayers whispered between clenched teeth. Isabeau was pale now. her lips the color of wax, her breath ragged, her voice gone. But her eyes were open wide and glassy, and she was whispering something over and over. Saris leaned close. It wasn't a prayer. It was a name. Evelyn. Evelyn. Heresies' hands trembled. Not from fear, but from something worse. Recognition. They never spoke of Evelyn in daylight. But every midwife in the region knew the name. 20 years before, another girl, young, beautiful, firstborn of a baker, died in the house of waiting. Her child was stillborn, the body deformed. A priest said it was punishment for vanity, that she had looked too long into her reflection, yet that she had whispered charms into river water, hoping for a boy. The villagers burned her clothes, salted her door, and waited for the curse to pass, but it never did. Evelyn's mother drowned herself the next winter. Help me. 2 more girls died in childbirth the following spring, and from then on, a silence grew like mold around that name. No one dared speak it, but now Isabeau was calling to her. Evelyn. Heresies turned toward the door. Fetch the priest, she barked to her assistant. Now, but it was too late. Isabeau's body began to seize, her back arched like a bow pulled tight. Her legs kicked against the blood-soaked sheets. No sound. And then stillness. Not the stillness of rest. But she had used it once before, in another century, on another woman. It's a desperate act of last resort. But of something leaving. Heresies placed her ear against the girl's chest. No breath, but the belly. The belly still moved. There was no time. Heresies grabbed her knife. It was not a blade made for flesh. It was meant for roots and bandages. A crude cesarean. There was no anesthesia, no antiseptic. Only one aim: save the baby, if not the mother. She cut, skin split like fruit to ripe. The blood sprayed across her apron. Beneath it, the child, purple, twisted, tangled in its own cord, like a strangled doll. It was not crying. Heresies pulled it free, slapped it, prayed to Mary, then slapped it again. A gasp, a twitch, a whimper, then a scream. A wail, so high and sharp it pierced the rafters. The child was alive, but the room was dead. They buried Isabeau the next morning, without ceremony. There was no procession, no hymn, only dirt and silence. Luc was not at the grave. He sat in the corner of his cottage, cradling the newborn like a man holds a ghost. He did not know how to feed it, how to clean it, how to name it. He only knew that Isabeau had screamed for someone who had died 20 years ago, that her eyes had not closed, that Heresies had taken something from her body that had not wanted to come out. The villagers said nothing. They nodded at him in silence, left food by the door, and crossed themselves when they passed, because some whispered that the child was not meant to live, that it had been born in death's hour, it would carry the curse. And Heresies, though she never spoke of it again, burned the knife that night. She did not sleep. She only watched the candle melt and waited for the child's cries to return. Each time it wailed, she flinched, because she could still hear the name, Villainy. They called him Etienne. The priest chose the name. It meant crown, strange word for a boy born in a pool of blood, with no mother to cradle him, no song to welcome him. Only the raw scream of being torn into a world that didn't want him. Luc, the father, did not speak for days. He stared at the child as if it were a wound, as if every breath Etienne took was borrowed from Isabeau's final gasp. He held the baby with stiff arms, never close to his chest, never with warmth. Still, he kept him alive. And he never spoke the boy's name. He boiled goat's milk. He changed the linens. He built a small cradle from pine, but he never smiled. And in Saint Morel, the village whispered. The midwives watched the boy closely. They said he had eyes too old, that he cried at odd hours, not like a hungry child, but like someone remembering something. And worst of all, he never laughed. By his second winter, children refused to play near him. By his third, goats bleated and kicked whenever he toddled past. By his fourth, a neighbor's child died of fever and someone left a dead crow on Lutz's doorstep. Heresies found it first. She buried the bird and said nothing. But she knew what it meant. One morning, Etienne wandered to the old well behind the chapel, It's the one they no longer drew water from. He stood at its edge for nearly an hour, staring into the dark, bottomless hole. When Therese found him, she asked gently, "What are you looking for, child?" He turned to her slowly and said, "The woman who sings." Therese's blood went cold. "What woman?" "She lives in the water. She knows my name. She says I came back wrong." That night, Therese did not sleep. Instead, she returned to the records what few pages the midwives kept. She found the old note. Aveline died in childbirth. Stillborn boy. No baptism. Then another and another. 8 deaths in a decade. All girls. All in the same house of waiting. All whispered to be. Not natural. Was it a pattern? A curse? Or just the cruel rhythm of medieval life? She didn't know. But Etienne's eyes haunted her. Eyes that seemed to carry more than for winters. Eyes that had seen something. By age 5, Etienne began to draw. On slate, on bark, even in the dirt. He sketched faces pale, sorrowful women with hollow eyes and open mouths. He drew ropes, fires, rooms with low ceilings. Once, Therese asked him what the images were. Said their memories. "Yours?" He paused. "No, hers." And then he hummed. Just for a moment. A tune Therese had heard only once on the lips of a dying girl, calling for someone long dead. Aveline Luc, too, had begun to change. He drank more, ate less. Sometimes he would wake at night screaming, convinced the child was going only to find Etienne curled in the corner of the room. Wide awake, eyes glowing faint in the firelight, the bond between father and son frayed like old rope. Luc blamed the boy. For the silence, for the cold, the feeling that something else lived in the house with them, something unseen. Then, one morning, a girl from the village disappeared. 7 years old, last seen chasing butterflies near the woods. They searched for 3 days. When they found her, she was alive but shaking, mute, covered in bramble scratches. She wouldn't speak. He said he wanted to show me the singing well, except once. To her mother in the dark. She whispered. I followed the boy. That night the whispers returned. The villagers remembered the crow. I don't know what he is, but he's not mine. It's the strange drawings, the humming in the night. And Luc, half-drunk, half-made, walked into the chapel with the boy in his arms and laid him at the altar. Take him, he said. Etienne looked up and smiled. For the first time in his life, they locked Etienne in the chapel. The priest, hands shaking, muttered Latin prayers he barely remembered. Therese stood by the door, arms crossed, watching, not praying, just waiting. Luc had fled. Some say he ran into the forest. Others say he drowned himself. No one searched. The villagers stayed away. They spoke in hushed tones about demons, changelings, witches reborn. The bravest among them carved a cross above every doorframe. The weakest simply whispered, that boy should not have lived. Inside the chapel, Etienne sat silently beneath the altar. He did not cry. He did not call out. He only traced lines into the dust circles, stars, crosses turned upside down. Sometimes he hummed. That same tune. The one Isabeau sang before she died. The one Aveline was said to whisper before she bled out. The one that always ended at the well. Therese returned at dusk. She brought no food, no candle, only a question. What are you? The boy tilted his head. You already know. You're not the devil. No. Then what? He looked toward the stained glass window. I am a door. And then he smiled, not cruelly, not sweetly, but knowingly. That night, the priest was found dead in the chapel, his throat torn not by blade, but by something jagged and old, like teeth made of stone. His hands were folded, his eyes wide, his lips split, as if from screaming something he could never say. The boy was gone, on the altar, scratched into the wood. One word, Aveline. Weeks passed, then months. No one saw Etienne again, but strange things began to happen. Children woke from dreams, crying about a woman in the well. Cattle gave stillbirths on nights when the moon turned orange. Women in labor began to hum without knowing the tune, and some began to bleed for days yet never die. Therese watched it all. She said nothing, but she knew. Something had changed. She's singing in a tongue I don't know. One evening, in the 7th winter since Isabeau's death, a young midwife barely trained came running to Heresies' door. "There's a girl," she said, breathless, "in labor, won't stop bleeding." Therese said nothing. She gathered her herbs, her old blade, and a single silver coin, the kind they used to place under tongues of the dead. The girl's home was by the edge of the woods. The room smelled of iron and rosemary, and the girl. She looked just like Isabeau. Same brow, same dark curls. And as she twisted in pain, she sang the tune, the exact one. Therese knelt beside her. "What's your name?" The girl opened her eyes. Black as dusk. Aveline. The candle flickered. The window cracked. The child was coming. Therese worked in silence. No prayers, no charms. Only blood, only pressure, only memory. And when the child emerged, it was quiet, no cry, no wail. The baby opened its eyes and smiled, not like Etienne, not like Isabeau, but like someone who remembered everything. That night, Therese returned to the well. She stared into it until her knees ached. She dropped the silver coin into the dark. She whispered one name, "Let them rest." And in the distance, the wind hummed a lullaby. In time, the well dried. The house of waiting collapsed. The cradle Luke carved rotted into moss, but the births continued. So did the whispers that some girls come back. That death for women is not always the end. Sometimes it's the door. And some doors do not close.